In this video I'll be making a focaccia sandwich with pesto, tomato and mozzarella. I start off by assembling the dough. Fresh yeast goes into a bowl with cold water. I stir until it's dissolved. I then add olive oil before adding a bit of the flour. I mix with my hand, add the salt and then the rest of the flour. I mix a bit more with my hand before covering it and letting it rest at room temperature for 30 minutes. I then fold it a few times over itself. I let it rest again and repeat this 3 times. After the final fold, I cover it and place it in the fridge overnight. Normally, I would use the classical kneading it for 10 minutes method before placing it directly in the fridge. But I wanted to show how easy it can be to make focaccia at home, even if you're uncomfortable kneading a dough. Now on to the pesto. I usually mix the pesto in my blender, but I've learned that traditionally it's made by a mortar and pestle, so I wanted to try it. I start by cutting 1 garlic clove into smaller pieces before adding them to my mortar. I add some sea salt on top of them and begin crushing them with my pestle. I add the pine nuts and crush them as well. I then add the basil and continue to process the ingredients. When it's beginning to look like a paste, I grate some Parmigiano Reggiano over it before adding some very mild flavored olive oil. Some olive oils are very bitter, and using them makes the pesto bitter in a bad way. Finally, I add a few drops of lemon juice. I don't think it's traditional and I was against it in the past, but after trying it a few years ago, I must admit that it adds a brightness that goes well with the rest of the ingredients. That is the best pesto I have ever made. The next day I take the focaccia dough out of the fridge. I cover a baking dish with olive oil. I place the dough inside and slightly push it towards the edges of the dish. I then cover it and let it rest at room temperature for about 2 hours. I cut some olives and sun-dried tomatoes into small pieces. I pour some more olive oil on top of the dough before spreading it out and pushing it down into the dough. I then place the olives and sun-dried tomatoes on top and try to push them down into the holes created by my fingers. I place the focaccia in a 225 degrees Celsius oven for 20 minutes. After taking it out 20 minutes later, I cover it with aluminum foil and let it rest for a while. I then carefully take it out of the baking dish and place it on top of a large cutting board. I inspect the result and make the following statement. Looks pretty good, feels pretty good. I cut the focaccia in half, inspect the cross section and then cut the halves in half as well. I inspect some more cross section before cutting 2 of the quarter pieces in half. I add pesto on all 4 pieces along with 4 tomato slices and some sliced mozzarella on 2 of them. I finish with some black pepper. There's a lot of salty components in the focaccia and a lot of salt in the dough as well. And the pesto is pretty salty, so I think we're gonna be good with the salt. That is deliciousness. Very nice, very fresh.